I'm Wojciech, and I see a lot of, or a few of the new not committers, contributors, maybe to be committers at the table. So welcome. I'm going to start. Well, this is going to be quite an informal session, but I'm going to start with just giving a brief overview of the AAA blueprint, backlog, and the two key work items for beryllium that I believe we have to tackle. So the full backlog is there on that Trello site, but the two key items that I feel we have to deliver is around the area of an authentication store that is cluster capable, and the completion of authorization functionality, which is currently not, well, plumbing is there, policy engine isn't there, but we'll touch on that later. This is the blueprint taken from our AAA page, and this was the blueprints done before any of the work started. And I circled the two areas that require completion. So, and I'll be focusing on these in a little while. But in essence, the blueprint saw that we have these pluggable authenticators, which to an extent we do. And thanks to Ryan's efforts, now we even SSSD, actually, we have somebody who actually knows how to run it. However, the permanent data store, well, there was never anything else than the hardwired data store that we started with, which has changed in lithium from SQLite to an H2 DBMS. However, neither of these are suitable for use in a cluster environment, meaning that the data store is only local to the nodes. It needs to be manually replicated to other cluster nodes. So the authentication stores basically needs to some outside operations to go and venture onto other ODL cluster nodes. So the idea was that, we migrate to MDSAL and basically use the MDSAL cluster infrastructure and store AAA data in there. So basically ride free on the inbuilt functionality of the MDSAL cluster store. But along, came also other people who said, well, maybe we don't want a MDSAL, maybe we want Cassandra, maybe we want, in the future, we'll want something else. So the idea is, okay, well, we actually have to make it a plugin. So we have to focus a little bit on the pluggable architecture and allow basically plug-in data stores in there, perhaps defaulting to MDSAL in the absence of any others. So that's the lower part there. The other circle there concerns the authorization piece. And actually, the stuff that is circled is pretty much already there. So the infrastructure I mentioned is basically, and I have a more specific diagram on this, but the infrastructure that we have currently is basically an authorization-capable data broker that sits on top of the regular MDSAL data broker. It's wired in dynamically. And it intercepts all of the RESTconf data requests or CRUD operations. And at the moment, it doesn't do anything with them because there's no policy engine. But basically, there's a hook to a policy engine. Actually, we have a very, very simple example of that in the code. And this is the big thing. The policy engine is missing. The policy engine should be basically then take the URI, extract from the context the username, consult the policy data store to basically get the policy for that user group and, well, determine the appropriate action. The way we've envisaged this is that the policies are actually modeled in Yang. So we have a policy data model, and it's of course modeled in Yang. which is meant to be multi-domain capable. So in other words, it should allow chaining of domain policies. That's a big statement for really, I guess, the use case of a customer, Coke, being itself a customer perhaps of AT&T, and Coke has its own authorization policies, AT&T has its own authorization policies, and one kind of overrides the other, or they go together. Now, there's, I'm sure, some rocket science in making sure that these policies end up being correctly interpreted and do not bog down the system performance. But let's say that that's a thing for optimization at a later date. Initially, we just have to see if the policy data model works. Now, Brian here will be doing a little demo with Shiro later on, perhaps, if we have time. Shiro is basically an open source framework for AAA, and we have considered it at various stages, even while drawing up this blueprint. The thing that we liked about Shiro is, of course, it's all there. It says a lot of nice things, but the thing that we came away with was that well, the policy model is actually very, very simplistic. So that's the thing that we have to kind of look at. So perhaps there is a way to use Shiro model and have a slightly richer policy model plugged into it. Okay, so moving to a clustered O10 pluggable data store. Oh, okay, yes, and so here I'm focusing on the O10 piece now. In Lithium, we delivered the token clustering because we basically pushed all the token caching into the MD cell now. So we get that piece for free. Currently, what is there, more or less, is, or a simplified version, is what is shown up in the diagram. That basically we have everything is welded together, effectively. We have IDM Lite proxy that directly call on the stores. These are basically Java classes that represent users, groups, etc. And each of those stores has a JDBC backend, currently with H2. So it's fairly inflexible. The simplistic approach, which we're at some stage thinking of pursuing for wiring the MD cell, is okay. We don't want to touch too much. Touch up too much. So we'll just rewire the stores to use an MD cell backend instead of the JDBC. Well, simple, but again, it's very inflexible. It certainly doesn't allow pluggability. So probably the better approach is that we need to identify or define really an interface, service interface between IDM Lite and the stores, or possibly a store. It's a little bit odd to have all of these, user stores, etc., being show up as services. Maybe a single store service would be better, and then have basically these stores be, as I said, offered as a service. So anybody who wants to provide a plugin, store plugin, would, like for example, MDCell, would implement the MDCell store and expose basically this interface as a service to be consumed by IDM Lite proxy. And again, I think in scope for us is to deliver on the MDCell part of these stores. If anybody's willing to work on other things like Cassandra, plugins, etc., of course, we don't currently have a backlog item for those, but if somebody comes along and says they want to work, that's fine. One thing that is clearly out of scope is, of course, any things of, or any notions of installing Cassandra on all those other nodes. So basically, that install procedure needs to be outside of the system.
So how does pluggable work here?
Sorry?
If you want to plug in a different integration, how do you do that?
how do we do that? Well, through the config subsystem, I'd imagine. So we would have the config subsystem wire up the other services. I mean, it will be, of course, a different bundle. So we can discuss on how we want to structure whether it's a different feature or whether but it will be something definitely configurable.
And in this diagram, we have store A and store B. What do you have?
Yeah, because we have, I don't know, 4 or 5 stores, so I didn't have space to list all of them out. But basically, currently, if you look at the code, we've got user store, credential store, role store, domain store. So every little thing, every little table, effectively, that we have in the SQL is currently a store and it's a class of its own. Yeah. Sorry? No. So we don't. I don't think. Well, so what would be the case for having that? So you're saying that you see a case for us having some data of AAA inside one type of store and some other data in another store? But what would be the case? I mean, why? I mean, I know it's feasible, but I mean possible. But why would that? What value would that give? Okay, well, we can consider that, but.
So a case might be that the policy is overridden temporarily. So you have a config policy and an operational policy.
Yeah, might be something like that too.
I mean, so, well, of course, with the MDZL data store, there is no splitting config operational between that, so we get one. But I was thinking more in terms of that we have 2 data stores at the same time, Cassandra and MDZL, and you're saying we could keep some stuff in MDZL, other stuff in Cassandra. I think it's kind of overcomplicating things, probably, for this use case. I mean, we're really storing, I mean, this is not very dynamic data here. Yes. Okay, yes, yeah, I agree. Okay, yes, I thought you were arguing for the opposite, but yeah.
So one question. In your proposal, you want to go to MDSAL, right? Could also look at existing Spring-based security models, right? We don't want to go towards any very standard Spring-based security model.
So I'm talking specifically. Well, we can look at the Spring with Shiro.
The Spring.
Yeah. But I'm specifically focusing on the data store part. Now, I don't think Spring. I mean, you're gonna plug in some data store into whatever framework you use. So the data store that is cluster capable, that comes out of the box for free with our ODL, let's say, context is the MDCell, right? So this is the one we certainly can work on. If somebody wants to pitch in Cassandra, that is good, but that requires tooling. I mean, it will not work out of the box for a customer deploying ODL.
So in the MDSAL, in memory, you store the authorization tokens and everything in the MDSAL?
Yes, and I mean, of course, assuming the persistent cluster data store. So yes.
In the operational data store?
Configuration.
Configuration is static, but when you're issuing tokens, that has to go into the operational.
Yes, it can be written into, yes.
Tokens are short-lived.
I mean, it doesn't, so at the moment, what we have in the token store is a very simple token, let's say, flushing mechanism. So basically, because tokens have a keep life, and yes, we keep them in, I believe, the operational data store. It actually doesn't matter that much where they're kept, but for the MDSAL, I mean, well, let's say it doesn't matter that much. And we have basically a simple flushing mechanism that, we, when triggered, we go and take the stale tokens out of the system. So this is infrastructure that's, well, MDSAL doesn't provide. We had to do it. There are there are specific caching stores that do that job for you, and we previously had one like that. Cache was the original one. But again, it required out-of-the-box configuration to get running.
But right now in this FDSAL, the tokens will be stored in the operational data store, right?
Yes. I have to check whether it's operational configuration, but I don't know why you make such an important point.
The reason is, if it's any short-lived data or something, I'm assuming you store it in operational, like token. But if it is almost like a configuration or static data, you store it in config data store.
We're arguing about implementation.
Right.
That's fine.
We're getting too low.
Yeah. So this is the idea. Now, as I mentioned, moving to service interface per store seems to be overkill. We probably need some facade or something like this, basically, to have one service interface for all of these stores. And but that's, I guess, something that we have to just sit down and look into. And another point that was raised up by Sharon was that, well, if anybody wants other SQL stores or use some proprietary extensions, currently the stores encode the SQL statements directly. Well, that's clearly going to be a little bit of a problem if somebody wants to use any proprietary SQL store. So Sharon had some ideas on resolving that. So, I guess high level, that's the direction. The next steps, well, as with anything concerning MDSAL, we have to complete the Yang models. So basically, complete the mapping of the existing data and define the Yang models for that. We already started a little bit on that. We have to, of course, define and rationalize these service interfaces, provide the wiring, the configuration, and clearly implement this stuff. So there is, I believe, a couple of people who already expressed interest and signed up for this. Of course, looking always for assistance. Generally, on our calls, we have the usual 3-4 people, but so I welcome new faces to join the crew. Anybody interested in joining this? Okay, great. Okay, authorization. So the basic requirements are really that we need to authorize CRUD operations, at least, well, for RESTconf. So, example is Joe at foo.com accessing a given URI. We also want to authorize RPC operations, notification subscriptions. This one's a little bit tricky, and have a common ODZ policy model for the system. And by the way, these policies, of course, since we were talking on the topic of clustering, I mean, the data store for these policies, of course, needs to be also cluster capable. There are some more advanced requirements that I keep on hearing about, and actually I heard some this week, like to allow applications to basically register themselves for additional ODZ operations. So the use case that I heard was, I think, in the SFC, well, was it session or, well, development, discussion, whatever, whereby basically in SFC they have, they're exposing data through RESTconf, and they want to prevent users from deleting data that they shouldn't be deleting. So basically, they expect a kind of subscription on data change request and gates that subscription. To me, that's an evident ODZ case. And I will be kind of ringing the bell in the community on the topic that we definitely need to pull on this together, because the worst the platform would do is, the community would do, is to allow every single application to develop their own ODZ policy model for handling this thing. Or to the users, it actually would be pretty terrible to have to configure all kinds of different policies on in a different model for different applications. So to me, this points in the direction that yes, we need to think about how to allow this in the ODZ framework, and then also going forward, we probably want to look at whether netconf authorization is anything that we should be tackling. So all of these operations for the basic requirements concern RESTconf. But ODL is equally configurable through netconf.
But why do you have protocol-specific architecture? If you have netconf, then you also have for open flow architecture.
So this is configuration on the controller. So
Through netconf or not conf?
yes,
Through netconf.
through netconf, yes. I mean, you can configure ODL through netconf.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And going even more detailed with at least one of the use cases we were discussing also around the blueprints requirements collection timeframe was the authorization for not for any protocol access or external access, but directly for the services for the apps running on the system itself. So so-called binding aware applications using binding aware API. Granted, there's always a way that those applications could circumvent and reach into the guts of MDSAL directly, but that's probably yes, but I mean, if you're running within the framework, there is a way to hack around if you don't follow the framework, and we recognize that. But at least if you're a well-behaved application, I think there are still valid use cases to allow, for example, some applications to modify some data as opposed to others. At the moment, it's a free-for-all. I mean, any application can access any other applications as long as it knows its Yank path.
But if every API takes a principal as one of the parameters, right, that has a security context, and that can be validated.
Yes. So we can certainly discuss the implementation.
The MDSAL APIs are in all the APIs.
Right.
Maybe we pass a principal as one of the
Yeah. Well, but that would be quite a big change to the API. Well, and of course, we have the legacy, which means not those extensions are not there. So chances are people will use the old ones. Yeah. So it requires some thought. That's why I put it under the more advanced requirements. Okay. So ODZ at a high level kind of went already over this, but basically it's currently it's there. I'm just showing the data broker and the RPC broker here. But on top of in the MDSAL, you've got the data broker and RPC broker. And the current infrastructure, which we have completed, is the green stuff. And those are basically the kind of shim brokers that expose the same APIs. And they wire themselves on top of the existing data broker in the system. And then, in turn, get wired up onto RESTconf, or RESTconf wires them in, really. So these data brokers basically sit in the middle between the real data broker and, yeah, as I said, there's an extra call that this data broker does today for the CRUD operation into the ODZ policy engine, which is the piece in orange, which is clearly missing. And, well, on that OZ policy engine, we need to do the work I mentioned. Questions on, question marks relate to how we want to allow these application-specific authorization decisions to be plugged into this, which may concern operations, but would probably, in my opinion, maybe concern more things like the actual data, which are domain specific. So for the SFC use case that they mentioned, user Joe or any user not being allowed to delete a particular data, that's to me like a bread and butter OZ case that can be handled through the policy engine. But should user Joe be allowed to configure the next hop IP address on node Z, that's probably an SFC domain-specific policy that should be within the application handling SFC. The work on the policy engine at a ballpark level, well, we clearly need a URI parsing logic, and actually we were thinking of using or abusing Shira for that. The Shira framework, since it already has good logic for that. Of course, evaluation of our policy model and the pluggability into these domain-specific decisions. So with that said, any questions? If no, we can perhaps sit around and, or maybe Ryan, you can.
I can just show the demo.
Well, I'm sure you'll be able to plug this one in, right? So yeah, sorry, question.
I have is, with respect to the services authorization or the applications authorization, when the applications are coming up, is there a way for applications to register with the policy authorization engine about the application?
So you're welcome. That's the design discussion. Yes, so at the moment, of course, no. But maybe that is the model that we should be following. That's the application should be registering themselves in.
Some sort of a service catalog.
Yes.
Yeah, there's nothing currently, but
Yeah. So we have those. We have those question marks. We're looking for the design of this, right? So by the way, if you care about this stuff, I mean, this design will not happen without your contribution because yeah. So. Yeah, so, well, yes, that is the case which we cannot really do much about. So you can always access the data, the DOM data directly, right? So that's why I said that, for well-behaved applications going through the framework, we can do something. For those bypassing it, we really cannot do much. There's been talk on, validation or signature of basically, services or features that you enable on a controller. And this is, part of the bigger Carafe, kind of bundle signing, etc. Framework. But, I mean, actually, part of it is bigger, is part of the framework. So the signing of a given bundle, so that you make sure that you actually have a trusted bundle is one thing. But then, I guess in terms of a certification of, is that bundle actually, good, making good use of the MDL of the system? Is it a well-behaved component? This probably, is something that maybe the community will come to do later on, or maybe the NFV community. I don't know who will do this, but. So
So it came through REST, but then it's doing internal from app to app or RPC?
currently, no.
Because that would be useful
Because currently we are wired up into RESTconf, but currently no. So that type of wiring, we would need to basically have that internal, that app that's got called. It would need to be also wired into the OZ data broker.
because it would need some input as to who is this user,
Right.
and something has to be in that RPC framework to provide it.
Yeah.
Today RPC is just taking like data input,
Mm-hmm.
nothing more for credentials.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is where maybe some of the OAuth tokens will come into picture, right?
Sorry. Then
OAuth tokens.
yes. What about them? Sorry.
I mean, when one application talks to another application on the behalf of the user, right? If you have already issued a token, OAuth token, then you're not passing the user tokens, but you're passing the application tokens on the behalf of the user. And that's where the OAuth 2 tokens come into picture, right?
Yes, I think I can certainly for web access. Yeah, but for kind of internal.
Yeah, for internal, but you're delegating it for the user.
Yeah.
Delegating.
Well, it seems like we certainly have a lot of design to be done ahead to handle these cases, like the RPC, internal application calling RPC, and how to get the security context for that. So Ryan here, he's done some poking around and, oh, sorry.
Is there a data model currently available for the policy?
Yes, yes. It hasn't been, I mean, it seems we have had a review of it. It seems to be okay. Please take a look and then provide additional feedback. It's not, as I said, it's not really being used at the moment. So it hasn't, I don't think it's, it certainly needs some more maturing. Yes. And yeah, so just the introduction, Ryan here, he did some poking around and he plugged in the Shiro framework, which is basically, as I mentioned, well, maybe Ryan, you'll introduce.
Yeah. Okay, so just as a little, I guess, prerequisite,
Oh, I'm going to give you the mic, sorry.
not particularly.
I think that it's being taped, so.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm wearing my community hat today. I'm part of Brocade. I'm not part of Apache or any of the Shiro development. Just want to give that as a little prerequisite. So I've been looking at this framework, which is a lot of custom code at the moment. In fact, this is just the Java line count. And from what I've seen, there have been some fundamental bugs that have been broken pretty much since the beginning. Grant creation hasn't worked actually since Helium, as I found out recently. So everybody's been using admin, user. And there's been no distinction between those, despite one being an admin account. A lot of this stuff is the same in every Java application in terms of auth and auth-z. And there are a lot of security frameworks that really excel at some of this stuff. So what I did is I went out and I looked to see if I could find something that exists that might give us a lot of this for free and might be easy to plug in to just the traditional open daylight model. So what I have here, and let's see if I can. So this is showing up as two monitors. I can't actually see this screen on my computer right now. But I have put what's called Apache Shiro directly into Open Daylight. And for this, I just put it directly into the controller. Is the easiest place to do it for now. Basically, we have a token auth filter in our current implementation. I replaced this with the Shiro web filter. and it's just running ODL RESTconf. I'll show you an example of what a Shiro config file looks like. This has a lot of commented out stuff, but basically, for this simple example, I'm just doing basic password authentication. For parity with what we currently have, I just have an admin and a user, as you can see, in the users section, and a few roles. So the admin user has the star role. Basically, this means that the admin user can do anything. The role user is only protected read. And what I'm really doing here is resource level authentication. It gets more granular. You can actually do the instance level authorization that Wojciech talked about a little bit earlier. So now I guess the first thing that I should do is prove that it's working so that you guys trust me. Do it on this one, actually. So I'm just going to try and hit the streams endpoint. As you can see, nothing's returned. If I authenticate, though, using admin, then I get the streams output, which is just a little stub at this point. I chose something that was simple on purpose. Now I'm going to show you something else, which is trying to make this call with the user. And I get a 403 error. This is because I granted access to this specific resource only to the admin user. So just to recap, what I've shown you today is with this patch set, which I was showing Wojciech earlier, just very simple. I think it's 109 lines total. I've been able to achieve authentication at the same level of parity with our existing code base of 26,000 lines of custom code. And I've been able to actually go one step further and show authorization in just a very small patch. For now, I'm really just using, I guess I should go a little bit into detail about Shiro in this sense of what it supports. So you can make these authn and authz related lookups directly in Java code. That's supported. So it's really flexible in that case. There are JSP tags, so for our web front end, perhaps Deluxe could utilize those. For this case, I just went into RESTconf and I put on some different annotations. So as you can see here, I have a get resource, and it requires permissions protected stream. This is the one that I specifically called out, as an easy one to use, where I didn't grant the user permissions to do this get method, but I granted the admin user. So this is just a simple annotation, but as you can imagine, if you're doing this in Java, you don't have to have these static strings. You could be using things that are perhaps gotten from a database, from MD-SAL. I think that it's a very powerful framework, and I'm kind of advocating that we might want to look at it as an alternative to what we currently have, because what we have right now could use some work. It's perhaps a little less flexible, but I think that, as I presented today, we can achieve exactly what we want to do using Shiro. I don't know if anybody has any questions or any feedback that they want to share. What? So as I showed you initially at the bottom here, there's a Shiro INI file. This is really the most basic case right here, where you're storing them in this flat file, and this is cheap. But you can feed it using JDBC, and it'll plug into any database that supports JDBC. You can define your own tables in there, and in fact, you just use a query. So you specify how you extract the password from your table, which can be SHA'd, of course. And you can also specify how to get the roles out. The only thing that we're going to have to do a little bit of work on is the multi-tenancy aspect, but there are examples of this online written by the author of this framework, Les Hazelwood. Is there another question?
Just a comment. I just wanted to support what you're doing. I think using an existing framework makes a ton of sense, especially if there's an active community around Shiro.
It's an active community. It's used in several large government projects and private projects. Another question?
So is this patch available? Have you applied for that?
Yeah, I've pushed the patch, but I've kept it as a draft for now because I didn't want it to get merged without getting some feedback from you guys about what we want to do, how we want to approach this problem. It's really, I haven't done any of the work to tear out any existing code. This is just in controller. Let's see if I can bring up my window.
Just to be clear, we can perhaps create a branch of this, but I don't see this anytime soon merging into.
But can we get access to it?
Yeah, the patch is there.
This is the patch. If you would like, I can add you to it. It's a draft, as I said. It's really only able to be read by me at this point. There's a big do not merge in front of it. This is basically, I got bored one weekend, and I wanted to see if I could make it work. And I noticed that, in order to do this myself, I was going to have to write a lot of code. I was going to have to test a lot of code because security is only proven through tested. And trust is really only built through really good testing and a good track record. We have a lot of custom code right now, and what I'd essentially like to do is utilize something that somebody's thought about for well over a decade, and something that's really worked in other places.
The other thing is, this checking the facts controller project, so they exactly also to make this change.
Yeah, this is the most basic case. Like, as Sharon pointed out earlier, user control in terms of adding and subtracting users right now doesn't exist. That's something that we'd have to work on because even though we can use JDBC as a pluggable store, we'd have to write the REST endpoints for that, or perhaps utilize Yang and MDSal. The other thing that I just wanted to point out is the backing data store is actually pluggable as well. As you saw, I did a basic Shiro INI file. You can use JDBC. You can even write your own. So what I envisioned is perhaps we could use MDSal at some point as the backing data store because it's providing data storage for the rest of our project. Are there any other questions?
Just like writing some custom endpoints or whatever for JDBC, I'm assuming you have support for like the AAA radius and LDAP in the backend.
Yeah, so this actually does have support out of the box for LDAP. I haven't looked up for radius yet, but it's one of those things where, as I said earlier, it's pluggable, and you can have multiple realms. This will allow you to have the coexistence of your basic admin, users, and LDAP authentication on top of that. So it can be done. I'm not sure if it has been yet, but it might be a good point that we can contribute some of that code to the Shiro project and help them. It's also an Apache license, very friendly. Are there any other questions?
Does this include the combination of users and application policies, or it will be just for user growth policies?
I think you could achieve both. Maybe not out of the box. So you're basically, your authorization model is pretty much spelled out right on Apache Shiro's website. And there are different levels of permission granularity where you can have, attribute level authorization where the permission can specify an attribute of an instance or resource, i.e. service can access certain customer records, or it can open certain doors, or open the kitchen door.
So the question would be, how would you define different applications in different wells? And we can say the users are eligible to access specific wells.
So I think, I'm not sure if this will address your question, but this application authorization, I think Shiro doesn't have a solution out of the box.
But you
Because
can
it's mainly
define
intended
different
for
wells.
providing
Shiro, is you can create different realms, right? So what what are the things that can be defined as part of a realm we can define it as, right?
Yeah, I'm pointing out that this framework, I think it's good, especially with the rest of access. The policy piece, the policy, as you saw from the Unity file that Ryan showed, the policies are very simplistic, right? It's just URL doesn't say much. So I don't quite know how well, how that would gel with the policy that we have in mind. But it's a trade, right? Maybe we should be thinking of, maybe the policy model is too complicated. Maybe we should be simplifying it using Shiro.
I think that we could still do fine granular access to particular resources. As I said, people have done it with this product. We would have to make that mapping, but right now, the user mapping needs to be created anyway. That's what Wojciech pointed out earlier, is that right now it's all an IDM Lite, which is a database. It's not all. So, and we can leverage certain pieces of this framework. We can leverage just the authentication piece and leave out the authorization piece to some other filter in our application. It's simple enough to do. Yeah, I don't know if there are any other questions, but this is what I had to show.
My second question is, why would I not choose Spring-based security?
This is just an alternative to Spring. As I said, this is something I baked up in a weekend.
RESTconf, we use Jersey, right? The Jersey REST framework. And Jersey REST framework has got a very nice integration with Spring security model, right? Already built in. And they've done a nice integration. The Jersey open source guys. So it's already available.
Are you saying you, as your company, uses Jesse, or?
No. In general, the Jersey is an open source. Jersey is the REST open source, right?
Jersey, sorry, yeah. This integrates with Jersey. That's what I just showed you.
But even the Spring integration is already there.
Yeah, this is already there too. That's what I'm saying. You're comparing two of the same thing. It's just competing products.
Yeah, Spring is very popular for many.
Apache Shiro is very popular too. You're really just arguing about an implementation detail. Regardless, I think what we're taking away from it is like, we might want to consider using something aside from our custom logic. I haven't actually opened up the source for it, but as I've shown, the integration is 103 lines of added code and four removable. Yep, but we're getting it for free.
Now, one thing that I guess to conclude the discussion, time, but one thing that I need to highlight here is that AAA and ODL is a weak point at the moment. And yeah, we need because it's not going anywhere, but there's nobody working on it. Nobody with time to work on it. So basically, I think there's me, there's Ryan, Sharon is pitching in. I know we have other contributors as well lined up. There's some people looking at tests, but we need more people. This takes more doing. And currently, it's a little bit of a laughable state because we have this fantastic audio controller with all this infrastructure, but everybody's using it in admin. And even if you assign users, you can assign, you can create new users job, but you can do anything with the system. So the policy piece is, I think, crucial.
And just to reiterate what he said, we could use more people working on this project, more eyes on it. I'm not by any means a security expert. That's why I went and picked up a piece of software that somebody had thought about for a long, long time. Somebody much more brilliant than me in this case.
No, that's fine. It's a good job.
Yeah, and Spring's an alternative, so we could look at that too.
So what about tokens? Once you authenticate it, right, you execute an RPC, right? Does this
So yeah, let me reiterate his question. He asked, will I have to authenticate with the username and password for everything? We can leverage our existing framework. So we have some endpoints right now that allow you to generate tokens, and they're protected also by a filter. So if we were to put Shiro's filter in front of this, we could use those existing APIs to generate a token, and then you can call the RPC method using that token.
So we're back to square one. If I use Shiro just for authentication, then how do I do authorization between the applications and so on and so on?
But you can propagate that information downwards. It's well defined. It's
If the roles are defined in a different data store and the users are defined in one store, then that's a clear problem.
Can you repeat that, please?
If the roles are defined in the authorization data store and the users are all defined or stored in a different store, it will be a problem.
Well, right now the authorization piece, when you get your authentication token, it's bound to a specific role, which is as granular as we really get with our policy right now.
Where is the role defined? Where is the role defined and where it is enforced?
In this case, it was right in the Shiro INI file. I invite you to really just look at this patch, and you'll have most of your questions answered. It's clearly spelled out. We're talking about really low-level implementation details right now that I'd love to take it offline. Sorry, what was that?
We might need to make a plugin for share and MD cell.
Yeah. Yep, and there are examples of this online. Right now, you can even just look at what they have, which is the JDBC realm. It's all open source. It's spelled out. Well, I guess it's going to depend on what you're trying to integrate with. Just the authentication piece could be done with a filter. I mean, if you're using northbound APIs already to mount devices for netconfig, for example, you could do authentication through this.
And by the way, when the RESTconf is auto-generated, right? So how do you plug in your Shiro into the RESTconf as a filter? You're plugging in as a filter, right?
Yeah, so there are different endpoints that are defined. So basically, RESTconf is Jersey right now. There's a Shiro filter, which sits in front of the application. And there are different annotations that I use directly in the RESTconf implementation. I forget which file this is. Yeah, just the requires permissions tag in this case, which is just an annotation. It's a pretty basic way to do it.
But I'm assuming, I'll go through this code, but they essentially, are you putting this Shiro validation as a REST filter or is it part of the REST itself?
Yeah, so it's, let me get to the right one. This is the filter definition.
Okay, so you have defined a REST filter.
Yeah, I said that earlier. It's in the WebXML. It's the Shiro filter. I'm using the one from out of the box.
Okay, is it more of a servlet filter or is it a REST filter? That's what I'm asking.
It's sitting on your WebXML application. It's going to protect everything. It's in WebXML, so it's protecting the whole Jersey server that you have behind it. And I have it set up so that the URL pattern is just matching everything that's coming in through the RESTconf filter. So let me relate it to a real-world use case. You're doing a curl against RESTconf. It's going to go through this filter first, and it's going to apply its custom logic to your request.
But it is not a per RESTconf level. It is across all RESTconf.
Shiro is protecting all of RESTconf in this case, but I'm defining different levels of authorization on each endpoint.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to take any more questions offline because I don't think I'm getting anywhere useful with this. But my point is, I think that we should consider this. Thank you for all your feedback.
Well, there was never anything else than the hardwired data store that we started with, which has changed in Lithium from SQLite to an H2 DBMS. However, neither of these are suitable for use in a cluster environment, meaning that the data store is only local to the nodes. It needs to be manually replicated to other cluster nodes. So the authentication stores basically needs to some outside operations to go and venture onto other ODL cluster nodes. So the idea was that, well, we migrate to MDCell and basically use the MDCell cluster infrastructure and store AAA data in there. So basically, ride free on the inbuilt functionality of the MDCell cluster store. But along, came also other people who said, well, maybe we don't want a MDCell, maybe we want Cassandra, maybe we want, in the future, we'll want something else. So the idea is, okay, well, we actually have to make it the plugin. So we have to focus a little bit on the pluggable architecture and allow basically plug-in data stores in there, perhaps defaulting to MDCell in the absence of any others. So that's the lower part there. The other circle there concerns the authorization piece. And actually, the stuff that is circled is pretty much already there. So the infrastructure I mentioned is basically, and I have a more specific diagram on this, but the infrastructure that we have currently is basically an authorization-capable data broker that sits on top of the regular MDCell data broker. It's wired in dynamically. And it intercepts all of the RESTconf data requests or CRUD operations. And at the moment, it doesn't do anything with them because there's no policy engine. But basically, there's a hook to a policy engine. Actually, we have a very, very simple example of that in the code. And this is the big thing. The policy engine is missing. The policy engine should be basically then take the URI, extract from the context the username, consult the policy data store to basically get the policy for that user group and, well, determine the appropriate action. The way we've envisaged this is that the policies are actually modeled in Yang. So we have a policy data model, and it's of course modeled in Yang, which is meant to be multi-domain capable. So in other words, it should allow chaining of domain policies. That's a big statement for really, I guess, the use case of a customer, Coke, being itself a customer perhaps of AT&T, and Coke has its own authorization policies, AT&T has its own authorization policies, and one kind of overrides the other, or they go together. Now, there's, I'm sure, some rocket science in making sure that these policies end up being correctly interpreted and do not bog down the system performance. But let's say that that's a thing for optimization at a later date. Initially, we just have to see if the policy data model works. Now, Brian here will be doing a little demo with Shiro later on, perhaps, if we have time. Shiro is basically an open source framework for AAA, and we have considered it at various stages, even while drawing up this blueprint. The thing that we liked about Shiro is, of course, it's all there. It says a lot of nice things. But the thing that we came away with was that well, the policy model is actually very, very simplistic. So that's the thing that we have to kind of look at. So perhaps there is a way to use Shiro model and have a slightly richer policy policy model plugged into it. Okay, so moving to a clustered O10 pluggable data store. Oh, okay, yes, and so here I'm focusing on the O10 piece now. In Lithium, we delivered the token clustering because we basically pushed all the token caching into the MD cell now. So we get that piece for free. Currently, what is there, more or less, is, or a simplified version, is what is shown up in the diagram. That basically we have everything is welded together, effectively. We have IDM Lite proxy that directly call on the stores. These are basically Java classes that represent users, groups, etc. And each of those stores has a JDBC backend, currently with H2. So it's fairly inflexible. The simplistic approach, which we're at some stage thinking of pursuing for wiring the MD cell, is okay. We don't want to touch too much, touch up too much. So we'll just rewire the stores to use an MD cell backend instead of the JDBC. Well, simple, but again, it's very inflexible. It certainly doesn't allow pluggability. So probably the better approach is that we need to identify or define really an interface, service interface between IDM Lite and the stores, or possibly a store. It's a little bit odd to have all of these, user stores, etc., show up as services. Maybe a single store service would be better, and then have basically these stores be, as I said, offer. I'm Wojciech, and I see a lot of or a few of the new contributors, maybe to be committers at the table. So welcome. I'm going to start. Well, this is going to be quite an informal session, but I'm going to start with just giving a brief overview of the AAA blueprint, backlog, and the two key work items for Beryllium that I believe we have to tackle. So the full backlog is there on that Trello site, but the two key items that I feel we have to deliver is around the area of an authentication store that is cluster capable, and the completion of authorization functionality, which is currently not, plumbing is there, policy engine isn't there, but we'll touch on that later. This is the blueprint taken from our AAA page, and this was the blueprints done before any of the work started. And I circled the two areas that require completion. So, and I'll be focusing on these in a little while. But in essence, the blueprint saw that we have these pluggable authenticators, which to an extent we do. And thanks to Ryan's efforts, now we even SSSD, actually, we have somebody who actually knows how to run it. However, the permanent data store, well,